Hi, everyone. Welcome to room 5, and we are about to hear Making the Web Accessible, the Responsibility None Taught Us About, which will be presented by Anuradha Kumari. So I will turn this over to Anuradha.
Thanks a lot, Heather. Thank you, organizers, for giving me this stage. I'm really honored. So yeah, today I will be talking about making the web accessible. So before starting, let us first have a small bit of introduction about myself. So I'm a front-end engineer. I'm working as a development specialist at MediaOcean. I'm quite passionate about JavaScript and accessibility. So here is my Twitter handle, miracle_404. So if you would like to have any kind of technical chat with me, come connect with me and we can talk about technical stuff. So things which we are going to cover today, we will start with introduction of accessibility and why should we care about it. And then we will see some of the principles and guidelines of how to design, code, and test with accessibility. So the goal of this talk is to equip you with some tips and tools on how to get started with accessibility. And you can go ahead and adopt these learnings in your projects and work today itself and help make web more accessible and inclusive for everyone. So accessibility, when we talk about accessibility, we refer to it by many names. So we can call it accessibility or we have a neuronym for it. So the neuronym comes from taking the first and last letter of the word accessibility, and there are 11 letters in between them. So we turn it into ALI or A11Y. So throughout this presentation, you will see me using these terms interchangeably. So let's see what accessibility is. It means making resources and services usable by everyone. Why it is important? So Tim Berners-Lee, quoting Tim Berners-Lee, who is the inventor of World Wide Web. So he quoted, the power of the web is in its universality and access by everyone regardless of disability is an essential aspect. You might be seeing a lot of buzz around accessibility lately, but is accessibility a new term? No, it is not. Web has been accessible by default from the very start. World's first website is totally accessible. So if you see, this is World's first website and I can navigate through all the links using the tabs. Why should we care about accessibility? We know what accessibility is, but why should we care about it? Because we exactly do not know what our users could be going through. As per World Health Organization or WHO, 15% of the world's population lives with some form of disability. This is a huge number. So what are different kinds of disabilities? There are many, including visual, auditory, physical, motor, and this list is not exhausted. There are lots of disabilities which are there in our world. So this means different types of users, and it means there are multiple ways in which we can access web apart from the conventional mouse. So users might be accessing our content through screen readers, keyboard only, switch, magnifiers, or many other assistive technologies. But when we talk about accessibility, disability is the first thing which comes into our mind. Is it the only thing? No. Accessibility is much more and much beyond just disabilities. A user might be facing some technical issue. There might be some slower connection. They might be using our content on a smaller device or an older browser or an older machine. Then there could be some situation in which we are not able to access the content properly. Let's say I'm trying to access any audio or video in a noisy environment. So I will not be able to hear it properly. Then there are progressive issues like with age, as age grows, I might lose some of my sight or hearing capabilities and motor capabilities. So these are some termed as progressive disabilities. Apart from that, we also have cognitive and learning disabilities. So there are different types of disabilities and different type of situations in which user can access our content. So how do we think about all of these? How do we start with accessibility? The first thing which I suggest is making yourself aware. So we can solve any issue only first if we acknowledge that the issue exists. So to make the world web accessible, we need to first acknowledge that, okay, we have been creating inaccessible content, make ourselves aware about what are different principles of accessibility, and then only can we solve this inaccessibility issue. Read about it. There are lots of good content on internet on accessibility. Go ahead, read about it, explore. There are some very good links, resources, which I have listed it down here. So if you see, this is the official website of accessibility, W3C Accessibility Standards Overview, and it contains lots of links in which you can get lots of information about web accessibility and different guidelines on how to achieve those. The one particular one which I would like to suggest is the authoring practices. So we have accessibility authoring practices in which there are different components listed and the guidelines on how to make those components totally accessible. So for example, if you take of any, let's say I take button example. So whenever I create a button by using anything, I will just come here and check that is my button really succeeding all the checklist which is there of all the guidelines which is present there. If yes, then I have created an accessible button. So I would advise you to come here and check for different components and see what are the guidelines for those components. So at first, these all might feel very overwhelming. So there is another alternate website, which is by WebAIM. So what they have done, they have provided a checklist. It's not a perfect accessibility checklist, but it contains all the points which if you follow you can create a very good and very accessible website. So go ahead, check it out and see if your website, if your application checks all of these points. If yes, then okay, we have created a very good accessible website. So I showed you the a website where we saw the guidelines. So what exactly are those guidelines? So it's called as WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and it contains 12 guidelines which are grouped into 4 different principles. And it's not at all required to follow all of them strictly. There are 3 different level of conformance which we can go through, which is A, AA, and AAA. The most common conformance level is AA. So let's see the 4 principles. What are the 4 principles? They are acronymed as POOR. So P for perceivable. What does it stand for? It stands for that our web content, it is made available to the human senses in any form. So it is perceivable by any form of human senses like sight, hearing, or touch. Then O stands for operable. It means that whatever content we are providing, whatever interactions, forms, navigation, they should all be operable by the users in any form, either by using a mouse, keyboard, or any other assistive technologies. U is for understandable. It means that whatever information we are providing, on our website, that should be understood by the users. So a good example of this would be a form instructions. So if we have many inputs, have we laid down a good instructions, a good list of instructions on how to fill that form, what will go in what input. The last one is robust. Robust means that our content, it should be robust enough that it can be interpreted by a wide variety of assistive technologies or user agents. Now, when we as we read more and more about accessibility, we will often come across some of the myths, some of the things which which will feel complex. So let's say there are some myths like the universal design or accessible design. It's ugly, it's not very creative, and it's too expensive to create accessible applications. It's time consuming, complex, or it's only the responsibility of developers and QAs. We designers or as decision makers, we don't have to do anything with it. These are all the myths. My suggestion would be, don't get overwhelmed by these myths. Read about it and implement it. So let's see the accessibility report of 2020. We need to understand the state of accessibility in which we are today in order to fix it, right? So WebAIM, what it does every year, it takes top 1 million websites of the world and audits their homepage for accessibility issues. And for 2020, if you see, these are the most common accessibility errors which have occurred in the top 1 million homepages around the world. So the most common, so highest one is low contrast, followed by missing alternative text. If you see all of these, none of these seems too complex to fix. We can go ahead and fix it with minimal cost. Today, in the rest of the session, we are going to see how to fix some of these issues. We should always start and implementing with accessibility in our mind. Mindset is the only mindset to proceed with. So now I will start talking about some of the tips in which we can design, develop, and test with accessibility. But before that, I would like to take a small pause and answer any questions if you would have. So yeah, I will work with the moderator to check if we have any questions. Then I can answer those, or else I can
Nope,
proceed.
no questions at this time.
Okay, shall we wait for 30 more seconds?
Sure.
Or okay, so yes, it's better to be safe. Uh, I will start resume if we do not get any questions in another 30 seconds.
No questions. I would resume.
Sure. So let's see first how we can design with accessibility in mind, which is also called as universal design. So the first step is responsive web design. So making our design responsive really aids to accessibility. Whenever designing, we should always keep in mind mobile first approach, and for any action or any information, don't rely just on hover, because if a person is using that content on mobile, they won't be able to hover over it. Also, we must be designed in such a way that when the user uses magnification tools, it should enable the user zoom, and they should be able to zoom it and read the content in a magnified way. Contrast ratio, as we saw earlier in the list of errors, that this was the highest error which occurred. So what exactly is contrast? It is just a difference between a background and foreground of our content. So background and foreground colors of our content. And the colors, they have a different readability when they are placed in a lighter background versus when they are placed in a darker background. We have a free tool called contrast checker, which really helps us to check the contrast of any color combination. So this is the contrast checker, and if you can see that we can select any of the background and foreground color, and we can play around to see if our color combination is accessible or not, or what is the contrast ratio, and which all conformance level does it adhere to. Next is forms. So forms are a very important part of our content, of our websites or applications, be it sign up form, login form, to fill out the payment details form. So these are very important part. So making these accessible to all kinds of user is really important for us. Let us see through some of the points in which we can create a really good accessible forms. The first one is associating the label with input fields. So many times we see forms where we do not have a label associated with the input. But if you see here, while a sighted user can still read out the placeholder and understand that, okay, I have to fill email address in this one and password in the another one. So they will know all the information. But a person who is using a screen reader, who is just relying on the screen reader to understand this content, for them the screen is just maybe black or something, and they are just hearing it what is there on the screen. So for them, they will have no way to understand what they have to fill in what input. So they won't be able to fill it properly, right? So if we attach labels to all of the inputs, it really becomes accessible for all kinds of users. And also describing what if we have any specific rules for any of those inputs, then we must describe that in with the label, so that users understand that what exactly they have to fill in that input text. The second one is not relying on the colors. So let's say we are trying to give some feedback to the user. In this case, we are trying to say the user that, hey, your password field has some error. Now we are relying just in on colors for this one. So we have this border has become red and the text is red now. But there are many users who face color blindness, so they cannot perceive color correctly. And one of those users category is they only see everything in a grayscale. So if this form was being seen by any such user, they would just see it grayed out. So they will not be able to understand which field really has error, and then they will not be able to fill it properly, right? So we should always provide descriptive feedback to the users. Now in this case, along with the styling which I had earlier, what I will do, I will place an icon and a message. So what this will do, this is providing extra information to the user. So even if they cannot perceive it through color, they have other sources to understand it. Like they know that, okay, there is an icon and a message. This means that, yes, this field has error. And what I have to do, I haven't put in 8 characters. So I should be able to go ahead and put it 8 characters, right? So these are some of the tips on how we can enhance accessibility through design. Always remember, the design decisions that harm accessibility, they also end up harming the usability. Now, let's see some of the examples on how we can code with accessibility in mind. The first step is to define the language for the elements. So whenever we define the language of the elements, it helps the translators to know that which language they are translating from. So our content could be accessed by anywhere around the world, and they might be using it in different local language. If we have our content language set, so let's say I say HTML and language equal to EN, that means my content is in English. So if a person who is accessing my content maybe in France, so the translator will know that they have to translate it from English to French for them. Also, it helps the screen readers to read the content in a correct language. And this language attribute, it can be attached to any level. So we can have page level or document level language attribute, as well as we can have it set at different sections or different elements. So let's say I have a section which has a quote in Spanish maybe. So I will go ahead and add it and say that, hey, this language is Spanish. So it really helps the translators and screen readers. Using semantic HTML, we must always try to use semantic HTML as much as possible. So what does semantic HTML mean? They are the HTML tags which have some meaning attached to them. It does not help much with styling or something, but they do are a great help for the assistive technologies because they provide accessibility information. So many times we would have seen, even I am culprit in past of creating buttons using non-semantic HTML like divs and spans, because the requirement was to create a very fancy button, and styling a button, I don't know, I found it hard maybe. But what happens when we create it using a semantic HTML is that the keyboard accessibility is not available for those buttons. So let's see it through an example. Okay. Yeah. So here I have three buttons. Let's say we are on an e-commerce site and I have different buttons on different pages. So add to cart button and comparing similar products. These buttons have been created using the button tag, which is semantic tab, but the confirm payment button that I have created using a div tag because I wanted to have some kind of styling over it or something. Okay, so let's say it will work all fine when a user is using a mouse, but what if the user is using screen reader or I mean keyboard? Okay, right? So I'm using my keyboard, I will try to tab, but when I tab, it will just skip the confirm payment button. So this button is not accessible by keyboard. Now imagine this is a very crucial action, a very of our website. If the user is not able to pay or if the user is not able to order, so what are they visiting our website for? They will not come again, right? Because we have blocked them out. So we just lost our customers. uh, so the first there are two ways we can fix it. First, we can use buttons and then it will be all good because we will get all the accessibility out of the box. Now I understand that we have so many application and website already in production and they might be using divs for such kind of interactions. So we cannot go ahead and replace everything with a button if they are maybe styled heavily or lots of code written for it, right? So for that, what we can do is that we can still go ahead and add some extra properties to that div to make it accessible. So for the first thing is we want it to be accessible by the keyboard. So for that, what we do, we add a tab index of 0. What it does, it gets it into the tabbing order. So now the user can tab over that button. We also provide it a role of button so that the screen readers, they might read out that this is a button, right? So user will know that, okay, this is a button. I need to perform some action here. And then the other important thing which we need to do is add an extra event listener. So if we have a button and we add just a click handler, it works perfectly fine. But for non-semantic HTML, we will have to add another event listener of key down. So we say it that, hey, so whenever user is pressing any key, check for it if they are pressing space bar or enter. So these are two of the key presses through which button action can be triggered as per accessibility guidelines. So if user presses any of these two keys, just go ahead and do your work. So what this extra piece of code is going to do, that it will make sure that your buttons are accessible even if you haven't used the semantic HTML for it. But yeah, rule of thumb is to always use semantic HTML wherever possible. Then links. So one of the errors which we saw were empty links. There were many empty links and it's one of very occurring kind of accessibility errors. So why do we create empty links? So links are used for navigation. So user can navigate from one place to another. So what I can think of why we use like empty links is we want just for styling purposes. Maybe what we really wanted was a button, but since the style was just a text with underline, we ended up using an anchor tag with a click handler and an empty href. But that's a very bad development practice. We must always use links when we want to navigate. So, and when we have a href for it. If we don't have a href for it, maybe anchor tag is not the right tag which we are trying to use. So the first rule, it should always be a non-empty, href should be non-empty. Then the text of link, it should be clear and explanatory. So for example, let's say we have link called click here. So what will user understand from it? What do I do? I mean, what do I do when I click here? What does it do? They have no clear understanding, right? But instead, what if we had products there? So the user, when it will read out, the users will know that, okay, this link will take me to products, right? And then we must inform the user about their expected behavior. So what does the link do? So maybe that link opens a new window. In that case, we might want to notify the users that, hey, this link is going to be opened in new window. So the user is expecting this. So this is not unexpected now. Also, some links might download some kind of documents. In that case also, maybe we provide the information about what kind of document is will be downloaded when they click on that link, so they know beforehand. Okay. Then text alternatives. So whenever we have any kind of media, graphics, images, audio, or video, we should have something alternative for all of these. So if we have graphics or images, we should have a alt property for it. And it has two rules basically. First thing is we should never leave it up. Never leave it out. We must always set a alt property. What do I set it to? So if that graphics, it shows some information to the user, right? So if it is showing some information and it needs to be read out to the user, write some description about it, some meaningful description, so that the user who are hard of sight, they are also able to understand what that image stands for. But if that image or that graphic is purely presentational, so it's just there for beautifying our content, then set it to empty string. In that case, that won't be read and that would be skipped, right? Then same for audio. If we have any audio content, attach a transcript for it, so that the people who are hard of hearing, they can read the transcript and still understand what the person is speaking. And same with video. For videos, we should have captions so that it is accessible for all different types of users. Let's see an example for alt. So let's say I have created a website where what I do, I suggest users that what should you read today, or what should be your next book. So today's suggestion is Inclusive Components by Hayden Pickering, right? But the code which I have written, I have just written image and source equal to some source. Let's say for this example, book.jpg. What will the screen reader read in this case? They will read graphics missing label. Now, this doesn't mean sense, right? Because the user will not be able to understand what graphics. So they want, since they won't understand that what book I am suggesting them, it's very like they might not be visiting my website next time. That's quite a possibility. So I just lost an user, right? And I also didn't give them good user experience. So let's now add a alt to it. So I have added an alt now. So what will happen that when the screen reader will read, they will read the alt and they will say graphics and inclusive components book by Hayden Pickering. So the user now knows the book name as well as the author name, and now they can decide for themselves if they want to read that or not. But they know the information and users are happy, right? We have provided information, they are able to access the information, happy user. Okay. Form labels. So we saw in design section that all the form elements must be labeled properly. How do we do it? Through code, right? There are multiple ways of doing that. The first one is wrap the input within the label tag. So in that case, whatever will be the value of label is automatically attached to the input which is wrapped within it. Second stage, second way would be that I can have label and input as two different elements, but there what I do, I provide an information to label called for. I say that, hey, this label is for movie name. What is this movie name? This movie name is the ID of the input for which this label is. So the accessibility tree will know that this label is associated with this input. But what if these labels are going to be visible on our content, right? So what if the designer comes and says that, hey, we have a business requirement and we do not want any labels. So I really don't want any labels. So just add those inputs and placeholders and it should be done, right? in that case also, as a developer, it's our responsibility to go ahead and add labels, but make it visually hidden. How do we do that? We use the same code. We use a label element and an input element. We attach it through for that this label is for this input. Then what we do extra is we provide it as a class. You can name it anything. Just for understanding purpose, I have named it as visually hidden. Now this CSS will contain the styling information which will hide this input from the visual users. So the output of this code, how the user who is able to see that content, they will just see this input text. They won't see any label here. So designer is also good, happy, our everyone is happy that okay, we are not showing the label, but we have also provided the information to a screen reader. That label is just visually hidden, but it's not out of the DOM. So whenever the screen readers will read out the content, they are going to still go ahead and read this label. And so we are not blocking our assistive tech users. We are taking care of them and we are helping them with the information. All the keyboard interactions, so all the interactions which happen in our content, they must be accessible through keyboard. So the different type of interactions which can happen could be like people are navigating through different content, or they are performing some action like maybe submitting form, clicking some button, and maybe there is some model or something, so some component has come up and they want to exit it. So these are some of the keyword interactions that can be done, and these all interactions should be accessible by keyboard. For writing the code, so for these we might need to write some event handlers, like the one we did for button when we added an event listener for key down. So we must remember some of the key values. These are some of the important key values which really help us in writing the event listeners. So the most commonly used key presses are enter and space bar for triggering any action, and then tab and shift tab for navigating through different interactive elements. So tab moves you forward, shift tab moves you backward, and the escape button. So whenever there is some pop-up or something open, when the user presses escape key, they must be able to close or exit that current component. So these are some of the common button key presses actions, and we can use these values to handle the event listeners. So, and the sample code is we iterate through the document and take out the element which we want to add event listener on. We go ahead, add event listener of key down and check for the key, for any key, for this case space and enter again, and then we go ahead and write our code. And this is going to handle the events for those key presses. Also, in JavaScript, there are different kind of event handlers. There are lots of event handlers. So whenever we are writing it, we must always be sure that the event handlers, they are all device independent. So like we must, instead of using on mouse up and on mouse down, we must use key up and key down, because mouse up and mouse down events, they are going to be triggered only through actions of mouse. But then again, keyboard users are blocked out. If required, we can combine these both together, but don't leave the keyboard users out for any scenario. Then there are certain device settings, so which users can enable. So these are called accessibility device settings. So one of the examples is for animation. So if you go ahead in your Windows or Mac, any laptop, you can go ahead and set a setting to say that, hey, I don't want to see animations. So for those, we must always honor the user device settings, and we can do that using a CSS media query, which is called preferred reduced motion, no preference. So I will quickly show an example of this. So, okay, this is a website. Here I have provided two examples. One is accessible and inaccessible. So right now what I have disabled animations on my machine. So, but if you see this inaccessible example here, I have told explicitly that, hey, I do not want to see animation, but still, because we haven't handled it through code, this is still going on animating, and this might be a very trouble for some kind of users, because there are certain kind of users who find it very uneasy to watch the animations and flashy content. That's why I have it always collapsed. And this is accessible example because this is now non-animating. So how we can do that? So we have all our animation code written all and good, but the main important class, so this is the class which I have applied on this element to animate it. What I will do, I will wrap it under a media query. So I will say that, hey, if user has no preference for reduced motion, right? So if they have no preference, it means they are open to see animation. In that case, please go ahead and apply animation on this class. So now it will start spinning and it will show animation. But in case user like me who have switched off or disabled animation, so it means I have a preference that I want to reduce motion as much as possible on my screen. For those users, this is not going to set, and I can see a still image or a still icon, and it's such a relief, right? So we must always honor device users device settings whenever possible. Then we have aria. So what are aria? So we have seen that using semantic HTML, we can really have keyboard accessibility out of the box and things like that. But then when we are creating any complex component, sometimes just using semantic HTML or adding alt and label, it doesn't work. We might need to have something more, some more information. So this is where aria comes to the rescue. It has different roles and states and properties which can be used to add the accessibility information to any component. But we must always cleverly use aria, because if you go ahead and write lots of aria in the code, it will really mess up with the assistive technologies, and it's going to do blunder. So that's why it's always told that no aria is better than bad aria. So if you are not sure which aria to use, go ahead, read it and then use it, because if we end up using a wrong aria roles or states for any component, then it's going to do more harm than good. Let's see a small example on how aria can come to our rescue. Let's say I have a button with just icon only. This is a button, but what I want to show, I am just showing an icon. There is no label here. It's just an icon, and on click of it, what will happen, that user will toggle into dark and light mode, right? Now, how will, since there is no label, it's just an icon, so how is a screen reader going to read it? So they will just read it button. So what button, right? The user will be in confusion. What button? What it is going to do if I click on it, right? So we can use aria-label and aria-hidden here uh, for accessibility. So what we do in button, we can add an aria-label. It won't be visible to the users, but it's visible to the assistive technologies like screen readers. So screen readers will read out and now and say that enable dark mode button. So now the user know that, okay, if I click on it, dark mode will be enabled. And also, since this icon, I do not want it in the flow because this is a button and I have already provided an aria label. So I can go ahead and add an aria hidden attribute to it, like aria hidden equal to true. It means that this icon specifically will not be visible to screen readers, or it won't be accessible to even keyboard. This is not much useful here, but when we end up using icons at many places in links and all, aria hidden comes to rescue. Now we have seen some important tips on how we can code with accessibility. Uh, let's see how we can test for accessibility, right? How can we test if our website or application is accessible or not? The first rule, always unplug your mouse. just remove the mouse from your machine and then try to access all the content, try to perform all the actions using just your keyboard. So if you are able to perform all the actions and you are able to navigate through the content properly in a logical manner, it means that you have done a great job implementing accessibility. But if you find any issues there, go ahead, fix them, come back, unplug the mouse, test again. So this is an iterative process. Unplug the mouse. The second thing is use the screen readers. Always test your content with using the screen readers. It has some learning curve, but go ahead and invest some time, learn in how to use a screen readers. And then there are multiple screen readers available for different types of platform. I have listed them out. Use one as per your platform and use screen readers for your application and see if the content is still accessible and understandable. Then tools and extensions. So there I am going to list some of the tools and extensions which can really help with our development and testing process. So first one is for development. So whenever while developing, we can use some of the IDE extensions as well as plugins. So some of first of them is web accessibility. What web accessibility is? It is an extension for Visual Studio Code. And here, if you see, it does not have a lots of accessibility features, but it still will let you know of the basic accessibility errors. So if you are using an image without alt, or if you are using a div, it's going to tell you that, hey, what is the role of this div and so on. So they will force you, and they will suggest you to use semantic HTML and provide right attributes for different types of elements. And for the next one, which is a ESLint plugin for JSX. So you have to install it and then configure it in ESLint config, and you are good to go. What it does, as the name suggests, it's useful for JSX code only. So mostly for React or wherever you are using JSX code. And as you write, as you code in JSX, it's going to inform you about the errors, that hey, there is some error here, and they also provide good information on how you can fix that error. So this is one good plugin which you can install, and it will help a lot in development phase itself. Apart from that, every popular library or framework has an accessibility guide of its own. React has its own guide, Angular has its own, there is a guide on React Native, and so on. So they make sure that you understand to go ahead and read those accessibility guidelines and see how you can still care for accessibility while using all the modern libraries and frameworks in JavaScript. Then we can use some of the tools like dev tools in browser and some extensions to audit the accessibility of any content of our websites and of our content, right? So to give you an example, let's say this is a website. First, I will go and see for Lighthouse. So what we do, we right click on it, we click on inspect, and this will open the dev tools for us. Normally it opens downwards, but I have used this option to make it towards the left. Now here what I want to do is, there are different options. If you can see here, elements console and so on. If you can't find Lighthouse there, click on this arrow and you will see an option called Lighthouse. Go ahead, and if you see, go ahead and check on accessibility desktop. So I want to check for accessibility, and for desktop, click on generate report. So it's going to take some time and generate an accessibility report for the current page, which is here. And it gives very detailed information on accessibility, like what failed, what went good and all. So if you see, we have an error here for form. So there is a form element which has not level attached with it, and it also gives you which element is it. So clicking on it will bring you back to that element. And then there are some things which cannot be catched by by automation or automatic audit. So in that case, what you have to check manually, it also lists it out. Go ahead, play around with it and check different websites which you use and see how they score on accessibility or what are the failures, how can they be fixed. The another one is Axe. So Axe needs to get installed. Lighthouse comes by default with the DevTools, but for Axe you need to install it as an extension and then it's available here. Both actually Lighthouse works on Axe principle itself, so they both are similar in a way. Then the third one is accessibility pane, which is available to us. So how that shows us accessibility information is we can inspect for any element. Let's say I inspect for this element h1. Okay, so let's inspect for this link. I inspected for this link, and if you see here, there are different tabs, styles computed, so on. Here we have an accessibility pane. Go ahead and see, it will give you some information which will say that, okay, this role is link and it's focusable, and also what is the label for it, which will be read out by the screen reader. So these are some of the things which can be used for testing. To conclude, whenever we are trying to create something, whenever we're creating any components or any websites, applications, always ask two questions. First, can the user access it, right? Is user able to access it by different types of ways? Then yes. Then second question, does it provide the ability to be usable? So does our content provide ability to be usable? So if the answer to both of these questions is yes, then our website or our application is fully accessible, and kudos to you for that. Let's always work to achieve a yes answer for these 2 points. To conclude, we must always consider users with a wide range of abilities and technologies. Follow the guidelines, go read about it, and follow them, implement them in your code. Always use a proper semantic HTML and manage your focus and keyboard interactivity. In the last, always focus on accessibility just as everything else. These are some of the resources which I have listed out. I will drop in the link of the presentation in the room and you can check it out, all the links. In the end, I also have an action item for you all. So if you have learned anything from this session, just pass on the learning, talk about it, talk about accessibility with your peers, with your friends, and teach them if possible. I mean, pass on the learning in whatever way you can. We need to spread the awareness around accessibility. It really needs lots of awareness to be spread, and we need all to work together to make the web a better place for every kind of user, to make it an inclusive place and to make the web accessible. So this is a responsibility for all of us. So let's all work together for this. Keep on learning and stay safe, everyone. Uh, Thanks a lot. And I can take the questions now. So if we have any questions in Slack or Slido, I will wait for Heather to let me know of the questions.
Hi, Anurata. We do have a question from Adam. You mentioned not relying on hover. Is there a well-accepted, accessible way to give comparable, easy, seamless display and hiding of optional information?
Sorry, I didn't get the second part. So yeah, don't rely on hover. And is there a easy, accessible way to do what?
To give comparable, easy, seamless display and hiding of optional info.
Okay, so if I'm correct, so they're talking about the information which is displayed on hover. So basically, if we are on mobile, so that information should be accessible on focus of it. So how focus will happen is if the user clicks on it. So a very classic example would be a question mark, which comes after any component. So, and it shows you some extra information about what that component is, or maybe what you need to do in that particular component. So when you are in website, hover might work. You hover over it and some tooltip opens up. But when we are in mobile, then I guess acceptable way would be that the user clicks on that icon and a model opens up. Mostly in mobile, when we create model, there are mostly full screen and with a cross button, and then the user has to press cross button over there to close that model and come back to the previous view. Uh, does that answer the question?
I'm waiting for a response.
Okay.
That is, yep. So he's just responded. Perfect. Thank you. That is the only question we have at this time.
Okay, that's awesome. We still have time, so I guess we can wait if we have any more questions. Okay. Meanwhile, what I will do is I will drop the presentation link in the Slack, so it is accessible by people. Do that.
No other questions. Thank you, Anurada.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Then it was a really pleasure giving this session, and I hope it was useful.